Now. Oh, geez, I don't like doing this. Okay. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to this week's episode of Out in Zion. This week, starting again. I am the worst at this.
It's okay.
Have fun with this, Chase. Yay. Okay,
We've all done it.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to this week's episode of Out in Zion. This week we're having a conversation that is part 1 of 2 about issues relating to reparative therapy or any kind of sexual orientation change efforts. The thing that is, I'll explain why we're talking about it this week in terms of current events in a minute. But first, let's do some introductions. I'm Kendall Wilcox, and I'm gay, and I'm Mormon, and I'm super single. That's me. Jay.
I'm Jay. I live in Salt Lake. I am gay partnered, formerly LDS, was active for about 30 years, but for several years have not been. I'd be more in the non-theist, maybe secular humanist range now, and I'm currently directing Circling Wagons conferences.
Oh, Laura. I'm muted.
Sure. Okay, yeah. I'm Laura Doolin. I'm a gay member of the church, also in a mixed orientation marriage. I'm also a therapist, and that's probably a good introduction for now.
Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Christofferson. I'm a gay active member of the church.
And Josh.
I am a gay active member of the church as well, also a therapist like Laura, and also in a mixed orientation marriage.
With 4 lovely daughters?
4 now. 4 lovely daughters, yeah.
Awesome.
One is 3 months old.
Beautiful. Well, welcome everybody. So tonight, again, this is part 1 of a conversation that we're going to be having, part 1 of 2, that we'll be having about sexual orientation change efforts. The things that sort of have motivated or inspired this conversation tonight are that in recent months, a jury trial in New Jersey found that Jonah, an organization made up of primarily of Orthodox Jews who want to in some way deal with or diminish or get rid of entirely their unwanted same-sex attraction, was found to be guilty of consumer fraud for the way that they approached their business and advertising what they could and could not do to certain clients. And so from that, the fallout from that jury decision had some specific impacts on the gay Mormon world. Very specifically, after that decision, well, in that trial, 2 members of the LDS same-sex attraction community, who are also sitting board members of the North Star organization, gave testimony during that trial in support of Jonah. They were witnesses for the defense. And then after the decision came down, most recently, Sam Wolf, who is the lawyer in the case, who works for Southern Poverty Law Center, who himself is a former Mormon who is gay, wrote an op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune that essentially called for, brought up what he saw as the connections between Journey into Manhood, which we'll talk about as we go, People Can Change, which are organizations that are much like the Jonah organization that was found guilty of consumer fraud. He called attention to those connections to the North Star community and directly called on leadership in North Star to do everything in its power to distance itself from those practices, those philosophies and modalities, and to clarify their position. And then in response to that, Rich Weiler, who runs People Can Change, which is the parent organization of Journey into Manhood, wrote a rebuttal for the Salt Lake Tribune where he defended his practices and what he sees as his people and his rights to address his unwanted same-sex attraction in the ways that he sees best to enable him, in his words, to maintain and keep his covenants. So, And then most recently after that, the North Star board just announced, I think yesterday, that the two members of their board who testified in the trial, Brett Dahlgren and Jeff Benyon, have decided to resign from their participation on the board of directors of North Star, so that, in their words, they would not cause any sort of undue distraction from the main mission of North Star, and so that they could sort of continue to help sustain the message that they've been trying to get out there, that North Star does not endorse any specific form of therapy, let alone reparative or conversion therapy. So that is the long introduction to why we're having this conversation tonight. And if any of the participants in the conversation want to clarify their understanding of what I just said, now would be the time to do that. No? Okay. We are essentially on the same page in terms of the facts, at least from where we're starting from. So tonight, the conversation we're going to have is actually about addressing what seem to be the most common motivations or issues or concerns that members of the church who experience same-sex attraction or who identify as gay or bisexual, not lesbian, because there's nothing for the women, sorry, and I'll let you talk about that, Laura, that they bring with them when they decide to approach and engage in activities like Journey into Manhood or Journey Beyond or any other practices that an organization like People Can Change offers. So we're just going to talk about what are those motivations. Why do people like us reach out to those organizations, and how do we personally address those issues in our own lives, whether that includes going to something like Journey to Manhood or something totally different. It's up to each of our own narratives. So that's how the conversation is going to go in this part and also in part 2. So the first question I want to put out to everybody is around this notion of the experience of having unwanted same-sex attraction. That is a term or a phrase that is very commonly used in these circles that we're talking about amongst those who do avail themselves of the services of an organization like Journey into Manhood, because they feel that their same-sex attraction is unwanted, and so they want to do something to make it go away or diminish it or in some way, right, get rid of it, right, because it's unwanted. So my question to each of you is, have you ever experienced that notion or that experience of not wanting your same-sex attraction? Or and if not, how would you phrase it differently? Or how do you respond to that? Josh.
I'll jump in on this one. It is an interesting kind of journey that one that is necessitated by I think growing up in the LDS church as a gay person. I kind of view myself as having a path of information that opened up little by little as I progressed on my journey. And so there were definitely times in my path on my journey that I did feel as though my sexual orientation was very unwanted. And in fact, I was actively pursuing, kind of as a 16 or 17-year-old kid, I was actively pursuing essentially reparative therapy. I didn't really know what it was at the time, but I was promised implicitly and explicitly by leaders and therapists and people around me that if I was proactive and really, really good and said lots of prayers and fasted and was able to live the gospel of Jesus Christ, that these people saw no reason why my sexual orientation shouldn't change. And I can sympathize with why they would have thought that. These are people that had not a lot of them had not encountered gay people in their life, and they were functioning under conclusions that they had reached from a religious standpoint that led them to believe that that would be truly the outcome. And so, so I was kind of, I talked to my bishop and then ended up seeing a therapist who was very much an advocate of reparative therapy. And so, so starting out in that journey, I was very much of the opinion that my sexual orientation was both unwanted as well as disgusting.
Why?
I've been reflecting a lot about this, actually. Disgusting because I think because of the rhetoric that exists. There's a lot of rhetoric that describes it as repugnant or disgusting or an abomination. But then in terms of, there was an internal portion of that as well. It was blockading me from achieving certain goals that I wanted in my life, both religious and social goals. And so it was something that I felt as though it was unwanted at that time.
So it was an impediment to how you saw your life playing out and how you wanted it to play out. So
exactly.
So why would you want it if it's a blockade from?
Yeah, if it's a blockade and everyone around me is saying, just do these things and it will shift, then
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Laura, you're unmuted, so that's why I called you.
Okay.
Laura, before you go, I did want to say one thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to just clarify that that's not necessarily how I view things now.
Oh, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, Laura. Go for it.
No, well, I get why you want to clarify, because for me, that journey of going from, that very negative place to a much more affirming place is really, really important. So that clarification speaks volumes to me. But I think for me, initially, I did not have that sense of internal unwantedness towards it. It was very much something, I fell in love with a female friend when I was 15, and that was a good feeling internally. I couldn't speak it out loud. I knew it was socially unacceptable, but that was such a meaningful sense of connection for me that my initial really kind of realization, or coming to terms with, was in that context. But then as time went on, it was like these two things, this religious self and this attracted to women self, because I wasn't calling myself gay, because that was that other thing, that was those people that I was clearly not.
Clearly.
It was all very compartmentalized, but, it was like this meaningful piece does not fit with this other meaningful piece, or the religious piece, in the way that it was talked about. And so it was more like in my late teens, early 20s, where it was like, this is so unacceptable and so incongruent with the path that I am supposed to be on, that it has to somehow go. And for me, it was a process of almost trying to
go away. Sorry, what do you mean by go?
Go in terms of like, well, I think I was trying to squelch like any feeling of sexual attraction, which just ended up making me kind of like have this goal of asexuality. Really, like, I'm not going to allow myself to feel anything just to feel like more like I fit with where it is that I feel like I'm supposed to go. So it was like a suppression of all, and Mormons were kind of taught to, suppress our sexuality anyway. And so it kind of fit with a lot of that way of speaking about it. But I can look back and see very clearly that that's what I was doing.
So interesting. So once you got to a place of realizing, oh, even though it's a really great feeling to feel in love with somebody, so right, it's a positive experience, but then no, that doesn't line up with the gospel, then so this becomes unwanted feelings. Your response at that moment was to repress.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to keep. we're going to get back to everybody's narrative. We're going to sort of string our narratives along here. But I'm curious, Tom, what do you have to say?
My experience as a preteen and teen was similar. Although I would say, for me, there are both elements of what was negative and what was positive
Mm-hmm.
for reasons of wanting to suddenly be cured of being gay. So the negative one was really, as Josh had said, as Laura has said, this sense from things that are talked about at church that it's a derailer of your eternal progression and ability to participate fully and meaningfully in building the kingdom of God on earth. So that was the negative part. The positive part was, being a teenager in particular who had zero attraction to girls. I was the model for the good priesthood boy who wasn't putting anybody's virtue in jeopardy.
Been there. Golden child.
Exactly. And in that sense of being seen or held out as, gee, you're the model priesthood boy, that's a positive thing. And just although it's corrosive, because what people are holding out as a positive has this underlying element of untruth, right? And so what I've often said is that my approach to it was, if I do all the right things, if I do everything God tells me to do, then this will go away. And my, I really loved my time serving as a missionary, and came home and was quite surprised to discover that I was still gay. I thought the deal was, I'll go do the 2 years, and then when I come home, it's all going to be perfect. And and I didn't have any problems on my mission, didn't have any sexual attraction to anybody there, and really lost myself in the work and loved it. But then the next step of that was, getting married, and a short marriage to a woman who certainly didn't deserve that situation, of me not knowing how to be, and not being completely forthcoming or having any way of trying to warn her what she was getting into. And then for me, it kind of all came to a screaming halt. It just came to a point where, look, I can't keep trying to be the good Mormon fella, pretending I'm not gay, or that somehow God's going to take this away. And so now I've got to figure out what it means to be gay.
So would it be fair to say that part of your response to realizing that there's some tension, some dissonance between, being gay and your aspirations to be a citizen in the building up the kingdom of God, as you put it, that it was that you did experience your same-sex attraction as unwanted.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and
it was something I thought that righteousness would cure.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. It seems like one of your responses was this increased righteousness, not necessarily only in the service of making it go away. It sounds like it was you would have done that anyways, right? As the good Tom Christofferson that you are, but if increased righteousness could make it go away, then more power to it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Jay, have you ever experienced it in terms of being unwanted?
No, I've always loved it.
Oh,
that's actually not at all true.
Aren't you modern?
As a teenager, of course, I could probably just mostly repeat what everyone else has said to a large degree, but I do remember it being kind of an evolution as a young teenager, looking online for anything I could find, because there was so very little, because I am so very old, and reading articles on the inside. I just remember unwanted same-sex attraction. Sure, that I identified with that. I did not want these feelings. I thought, and I can go into this if it becomes relevant later, but I thought I had created these in myself. I had brought them upon myself through whatever kinds of associations I might have made over time. And, I definitely thought that they needed to go away. If I could just resolve these, everything else would be so much easier. And I could just get to the business of going on a mission and getting married and doing all the things that I needed to do. And, friendships would be easier, and dating would be easier, and for heaven's sake, going to the locker room would be easier. That was terrifying for me as a kid. So all of this stuff was so unwanted. And that eventually gave way to more of a, when Laura talked about the kind of skewing asexual, that's something I totally did as well. Over time, it became more of a channeling those attractions in ways that I felt were more healthy and productive and whatever. And at that point, I was able to move to a place of less unwanted and more, I don't really want them. I don't really unwant them. They're just there and we're going to deal with it. It's fine. But yeah, it certainly started with unwanted.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think even just from this selection of all of us, I mean, I resonate with everything you all said. I think I was a late bloomer in the sense that I fell in love with somebody at 16 and I did not associate it with the gay. And even with many people around me saying, so does this mean you're gay? And I'm like, no, what's wrong with you people? I just really, 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 really like this guy and I miss him dearly and I'm going to cry about it for the next 3 months. It doesn't make me gay. Jeez, what's wrong with pretty people? But then, yeah, as I started to learn how to do the math and then actually psychologically allowed that possibility to enter my universe, which was a battle royale, then I did, of course, experienced it absolutely as unwanted. And I worked on repression. I worked on increased righteousness. I didn't jump into reparative therapy at the get-go. It was more of sort of what Jay sort of maybe explained about, like, just really investigating, really, really investigating. Because at that point I was an adult. And so, a bit more autonomous and had to figure this out for myself. So this is helpful sort of beginning our narratives and at least establishing that we can at least empathize with, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, the feeling at least of that, there is dissonance between the experience of being gay or same-sex attracted and being Mormon, and that can be existentially, horrifying or at least unwanted, bad enough that we don't want it, which can then motivate us to do all sorts of, take all sorts of actions. Okay.
May I just add one comment to that, though, which is,
Please.
Not being a spring chicken.
Yeah.
It's 30 years ago when I finally came out. I would certainly hope that a teenager today, a 13-year-old today, coming out would not need to go through anywhere near the gyrations that I did to figure this out, because I would hope that with MormonsandGays.org and other things, the messaging is starting to get clearer that you don't need to try and offer up increased righteousness so that the Lord will magically cure you. And so I hope we'll talk about that in a moment of, why we might feel there is no need for a cure.
Well, let's talk about it right now. Yeah.
Don't go through what we went through.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that right now. I mean, that's exactly where I was going next is, okay, so you can continue on your own personal narratives, but also sort of bringing it into the larger context of where we are today of, well, does this ever still show up for you guys? The feeling of like, I wish I didn't feel same-sex attracted, given all the, craziness and heartache it brings into my life, no matter where you might be on, because we're all in some very different sort of places on the spectrum of being gay and Mormon or not Mormon we're all pretty gay. But so how does that show up for you now? And if it doesn't show up anymore, why? Jay.
That's an interesting question. Immediate answer is no, it doesn't show up anymore. I don't look around my cozy little house and my cute little garden and whatever and my cute little partner and think, oh my goodness, life would be so much better if this weren't a thing. No, that doesn't happen. What does happen sometimes is it would be so much easier if this were congruent with everything else in my life. That certainly happens. But will
you say a little bit? Will you just go a little deeper on that point?
We've got family and friends. Most of our family and friends are actively LDS, and they're now in some ways struggling with this more than We are, I think, even to a degree, but it would be easier if legally and socially and all of this, it just weren't an issue. If people could accept it, or if magically one of us, poof, is a female and everything works like it's supposed to. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't want biological children with my spouse, that kind of a thing. Like there are things that you're giving up in a way that other people do too, but maybe I wouldn't have had to. I don't feel a lot of resentment for that. But it's a thing that has happened. And the thing that's different to me about it is that it's less this internal angsty experience, and it's more external. It's more the world around me and less my inner world.
Right. And you mentioned that part of your process was that you were able to get to a place of saying, okay, it's not so much that this is unwanted, it's just is. I accept that it is, so I'm going to stop battling it, but I'm going to sort of channel it in a way, right?
Right.
So what did you mean by that, or what was that about? What did that look like?
Well, when I first had that I was still very much active LDS and believing, and I at that point figured maybe I could find a woman that I could marry and we could have a happy life together, but that hadn't happened yet, and I hadn't felt attracted to a woman in a way that I had with a couple of guys, and so it was something on the horizon, but that was where I was. I was accepting that I might be single, I might be able to find somebody. But in the meantime, I had a lot of friends, and I had moved to Utah. I had been in Seattle before, and I don't know. I made a lot of good friends that were also same-sex attracted, as we tended to identify. Although I actually chose a different term that we made up, a friend and I.
What was that?
I wasn't going to say it because so many people want it to just die and be done. Moho was the word.
Just own it.
So we came up with this term to describe ourselves to avoid having to use all of this lengthy working around or having to use the word gay, because that carried stigma and lifestyle connections that we didn't feel described us. Anyway, the same-sex attraction thing, I never really bought into the reparative drive theory and all of these kinds of things that were floating around. But at the same time, I also did feel like there was an enjoyable and positive connection that could come from being attracted to people and letting that be something that is congruent with church standards, and letting it be friendship that's very affectionate or whatever it might be, just keeping it on that friend level. Now that gets into some really muddy territory, and we can get into that.
We'll cover that a little later. Yeah.
But that's kind of what it looked like for me, was letting it be a positive impetus to good friendships and connection, without entertaining the idea of it becoming romantic or sexual, especially.
So at that point, you were able to make that internal psychological switch from unwanted and sort of a disdain for the feelings that would naturally show up to, oh, okay, I can actually embrace and even enjoy, and even want, shall we say?
To some degree. Yeah. I got to the point where the promise that it would be taken away in the next life, even though I wanted to make it work in a gospel congruent way and marry a woman and whatever I needed to do, that promise of this feelings being taken away didn't feel super positive to me. That wasn't very motivating to me.
Interesting. So you didn't try to make them go away?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
That doesn't mean I didn't try to contextualize or whatever, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Which we will get to. Right. But Josh, you did try to make them actually go away. I mean, you can correct my words, right? But you through advice, like you said, of your leaders, tried to actually proactively make them go away.
Right. Yeah, it was the classic reparative theory of healing healing attachment. I'm not going to language it correctly.
Well, and we'll get to some of the specific modalities and the underlying assumptions, but I want to just find out more about like that experience of, as Jay sort of told the story of how he evolved in going from them being unwanted feelings of same-sex attraction to even embracing them. What was that phase of your life where you were directly attacking them. Like, he sort of chose not to, right? He sort of recontextualized or
Right.
thought of him differently, and we'll get to Tom as well. But you tried to make them go away.
Yeah.
And so we won't talk about the how necessarily yet, because that's coming,
Sure.
but the why and what was that like?
The why. Similar to what I said before. The why was just I had certain goals, certain objectives, social, religious, that I wanted to achieve, and so a lot of it boiled down to living what I consider to be a gospel congruent life for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was my, in terms of my own journey. That was the why.
Yeah, and it seemed like in addition to that, it was also because you were given that counsel, right, by your leaders,
Sure.
family, by therapists, and they held out the promise, right?
It was kind of like, there was no specific moment that I would look at and be like, actually, now that I say that, there are actually a couple of moments. I remember after marriage being explicitly promised by a bishop after a blessing that my sexual orientation would change, and him just giving this very kind of like filled with the potency of new bishopdom, I promise you that by the end of your life, these things will shift. But even at that point, there was a level of dubiousness in my mind around it. But, I guess that speaks to the story for me, which is that in terms of attacking it, it was never like a full on, I never did like electroshock therapy or anything. This was just, it was all just kind of in line with the relational components of the theories underscoring what therapy is. So in some ways similar to what Jay was describing. And then for me, there was the added component of actively dating and then marrying my wife. I was very young. I proposed to Lolly 1 week after I got home from my mission. So we had known each other our whole entire lives,
right?
And she had been aware that I was gay for many years. But from the standpoint of a 35-year-old, I'm like, wow, 20. I was like, I had been 22 for a couple weeks. That's really, it was pretty fresh. I was pretty young.
But so how did that feel, for example, when the bishop or in maybe other unnamed experiences where in some form or another, the promise was held out for you, like, and even, I don't know, pick your word, but like dictated to you that change will happen. Like, don't accept this stuff, change it. And if you do, it will.
Complete and utter disillusion.
Whoa, wait, what?
Total disillusion.
Wow.
It wasn't for me, for whatever reason, it was not filled with despair, thankfully, because of certain components in my life that were set up that I felt comfortable with. My marriage being one of them. But there was a definite moment where I was like, wow, okay. So kind of what Tom was describing, I served the mission. I got home. I got married. I've been having heteronormative sex for, a year or whatever. And I'm sitting and talking to a counselor, and finally I'm just like, wait, this is not going to change. Like, if this was going to change, that was the final thing for me. I was like, okay, I am having repeated orgasms, that if there was some kind of conditioning that could occur through that stimulus, it would be happening. And it wasn't.
Wow.
There was no change happening. And so, probably really early on in my marriage, I had suspected, but I just, how these processes go, you have different parts of your mind that have gotten to different parts of the conclusions. But there was that final moment of just like, they were wrong, like straight up, totally 100% wrong. And that is disillusioning for sure.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to come back to that, but coming around to Tom, and then Laura, we're headed your way. But Tom, yeah, he mentioned again your process and your sort of your approach, and I'm curious because I'm guessing that today the phrase unwanted same-sex attraction does not resonate with how you see yourself and how you experience your attractions. I'm guessing.
Since you know very well that I respond to that strongly, yes, you're guessing correctly. In a conversation with Kendall some time ago, I'd said, yeah, gravity is unwanted too. I'd like to be able to jump and fly, but welcome to the real world. But anyway, but for me in my process, kind of three things happened all around the same time that really set up the future for me. So one was, and I don't say this in a boastful way because of course there are always more things one could do, but I came to a realization that I really had laid it all on the altar, and that I had done the best I could do over a prolonged period of time to try and live in such a way that these feelings would leave me, and they weren't leaving. So that was number one. And so I felt like I couldn't continue to be such, that my situation couldn't continue to be such a negative circumstance for this woman who had, unknowingly gotten herself into it. And unlike you, Josh, never having had the experience of the big O in that circumstance. But also I really felt like, okay, great. So I could, in a sense, with a clean conscience, say, all right, I've done everything I can do, and it's time to do something differently. And so I felt good about saying, okay, I now need to seek excommunication and be able to clear the space in my own head to go find out what it means to be gay, because I'm not going to keep the rules of being a Mormon, and I don't want to pretend that I am. The second thing that happened about the same time was that one of my older brothers had a good friend who was a regional director of what was then called LDS Social Services. When my brother approached him and said, hey, who's a good counselor that we could hook Tom up with, who could help him be cured? This brother said to my brother, in my career, I've talked literally probably 400 returned missionaries who are gay and desperately want to be able to be cured, to be straight, to be married, to be in the church, to have it all. And he said, and my guess is probably 4% of the people I've counseled with are now in happy opposite sex marriages. And he said, my view is they were bisexual to begin with, but in any event, he said, look, Greg, it's just that's not going to happen. And so that was really helpful to my family, that as I was headed down this path, they could at least feel, oh, there's not yet some therapy that would change Tom and that we need to try and get him to accept. And so that was a really helpful thing. And then the third thing that happened around the same time was I met a guy that I fell in love with and finally found out what all those love songs mean and all the sappy movies. In fact, that is what it feels like. And I had no idea. And so all those things kind of came together. And for me, there's really been no turning back. I've had a very different relationship with the church at various points than I do today. But from that point on, it's like I have brown eyes. I'm gay.
Yeah. Sounds like you had quite the sort of the nice, well-rounded grand slam of motivations, right? Of both like cognitive, logical reasons, right? To stop not wanting your same-sex attraction, but also emotional, like, whoa, why would I not want this thing that feels so good that I'm finally experiencing?
Right.
Yeah. Beautiful. Now, Laura, we last left you repressing your general sexuality.
Yes.
But today,
like the monk years.
But today you
Idaho at that time.
But today you generally definitely seem to be accepting, if not embracing, of your same-sex attraction, right?
Right. I don't usually use that word anymore.
Right. That's part of the process, right?
I think so, for some of us it is. yeah, so I went even through that stage of, I'll story a little more into that stage of repression, because at that time I was at one university and my best friend was at another university, and I had really strong feelings for her. And so I could just, when I was just at my university, I could repress. I was so great. But, we'd connect up, and all those feelings were still there, and I'm in the closet, so I'm not expressing any of this, but I'm just very cognizant that no matter how righteous, no matter how no matter how much I'm praying, no matter how much I'm reading my scriptures and having this really intense devotion, when she's around or when she's involved, I'm right back there. And ultimately for me, I was very much in love with her. She got married. And then it was that point of just devastation that it was like, oh, I never want to go through this again. Not because it's the unwanted attraction, but because, oh my gosh, this is the most painful feeling in the world, to not remain with the person that you love. And if I ever let myself do that again, it's going to be with somebody that I can have. And I gotta figure out this with a man in the way that the church is, pushing me towards, or, so that goal became all the more, I don't know, real, but in a different way, I guess.
Motivated for sure, right? Because
motivated,
like
and just
negative motivation.
almost like, yeah, like this thing that I can't have is so painful that I can't even go there. Like this girl who's kind of cute and flirty with me and wants to spend time with me, I'm not interested, because I know that I'm sticking on the church path, and that's just going to hurt. Like,
Yeah.
again. So that's where I was at that point.
Wow.
And in that context, that is when I ended up meeting my husband, and, falling in love with him, and then just kind of breathing this huge sigh of relief. Like, oh, good. Like I don't have to
yay.
worry about this anymore, because, I won the prize,
Because you get to experience romantic love in the right context, so it's not
and it's just like, all that I don't have to think about that anymore, and I could just like compartmentalize it off completely. That's the way I thought about it. And so there's this huge sigh of relief. But once being married, I found myself like continuing to avoid women, avoid, because I'd compartmentalized this part of myself. But that's not a healthy way to be in the world, ultimately. To be avoiding people who are your peers and you would socially normally be friends with, especially as a married person, right? Because socially I'm expected now to hang in Relief Society and hang with the ladies, and I'm having kids, and it's just like moms groups and all this stuff, and it's very gender segregated. After John and I were married, one of my kind of not my direct supervisors, but somebody who was providing supervision. I was working at the Institute for Cognitive Therapy, and so they would like kind of Skype this lady in. Before Skype, it was like phone conferences, but she was this big cognitive therapist who, it was like rumored she is a lesbian. And this was one of like my first exposures to like a real lesbian. And, the thoughts that went through my head, like, I had such dissonance, because she wasn't evil. She wasn't a bad person. And it just helped me kind of have this mirror as to what I had internalized about what that even meant to be.
And at this point, were you still experiencing your same-sex attraction as
yeah,
unwanted, though? Yeah, so you're
not unwanted so much as compartmentalized.
Just
like
not dealing with.
So traumatized by its reality in the context of my Mormonism, like it had no place. Like, no, I am a covenant-keeping, righteous Mormon, so that has no place on that path. That's the way I thought about it back then. I see you, Tom.
We'll get to that
That's
later.
the way I thought, but that's the way I thought about it. I thought it had no space in that identity. And so it had to just, let's just keep kind of pushing it to the background. And
So we just have a few minutes left, so I definitely want to hear the rest of your story. We'll finish on your story, but definitely want to if you'll get us to that place of how you have been able to come to where you are now of experiencing your same-sex attraction as not unwanted.
yeah, I can't story that quickly. This is just such a journey of back and forthness, and there was such a vacuum to that where for a long time where positive things could show up. So this therapist had literally written a published article that was developing and maintaining a positive self-identity as a lesbian, a cognitive behavioral approach.
Okay.
And I felt like reading that I was looking at pornography or something, because it was so outside of my world. Like I'm doing something wrong because I'm thinking about this in the wrong way, but I'm just trying to somehow kind of come to terms with that. And that was my first exposure to something affirming. And I thought, wow, this is very useful to me. Very useful to me. So I'll stop there.
That's good.
That was a decade ago. There's tons more.
That's good. That's good. That reminds me of, in my own journey, one of the clinchers for me is this idea of if I had heard other people's stories of being able to pray and get that sense of validation to in order to be able to let go of the unwantedness, or that approaching their same-sex attraction as being unwanted, perpetually, by just asking God and saying, well, are you okay that I'm gay? Because then maybe I can be okay that I'm gay. But sort of picking up what you were saying, Laura, that idea sounded so hypocritical, or whatever the word is. I just lost the word. But like so unorthodox, so unacceptable, and such a conflation, of churchy stuff with the ways of the world, philosophies of men. It was years long relationship with wrestling with that, sort of what you were saying of like, somebody out here is offering hope of like, hey, there's one little nugget to help you at least get past the hurdle of just accepting the fact that you're gay. But the idea of accepting myself as gay seemed so wrong that I had to help in good conscience. I felt like I had to hold myself in a perpetual state of not wanting the same-sex attraction. Otherwise, I was letting the camel's nose of Satan into my tent, to really mix a metaphor. And that it was a slippery slope from there, right? I'd be calling myself gay.
If you feel good about yourself, you're going to somehow do that thing inevitably. So it's just like one is going to be tied to the other. So you never can look at it that way. So what are you doing?
Exactly. So we just have 2 minutes left in this conversation, and in part 2, we're going to get into talking about the many different sort of practices, modalities, underlying assumptions of reparative therapy, or whatever each person chooses to call it. But just for wrapping up, thoughts and feelings about just this one point that we've hit, which is really the biggest motivating factor. If we could sum everything up about like what draws people into an experience like Journey into Manhood or Jonah, or any sort of sexual orientation change efforts, beyond just sort of the basic increased personal righteousness, which we heard about tonight, but into really specific forms like Josh experienced and that we're going to talk about. Any other final thoughts about this process of going from unwanted to accepting our gayness? Jay?
It's funny. I think probably a lot of what I've heard described, Laura was talking about a lot of her reactions and compartmentalizing. I think that's probably more, in a lot of ways, more typical an experience than some of what I went through. I was, when I'm playing a game, like on the Wii U, which I totally don't play because I'm too old for that. But if I did, and it's not going well, and I'm playing a level, I will obsessively play that level over and over and over and over again until I beat the bleeping thing, because I've got to get this.
Mhm.
And that was a little bit more my approach. So from a very early age, when I said earlier that I didn't necessarily try to change it, that's not, at that time I didn't try to change it. Earlier, I most definitely did.
Oh.
And that's maybe another story, but it was, I never did it in a formalized way. I did it in ways that I came up with. But even after I felt like it was not unwanted anymore, it was this, there was always this sense of, if only this could be resolved somehow. And that really, that for me, and I won't presume to generalize this onto everybody, but for me, right up until, oh gosh, I don't know when, but there was always that sense of, if only either the rock or the hard place could just. And so there was a lot of exploration of how to do that. And that drove me not to such programs, but to other methods of trying to make this work. And it became a very, almost, you could say, almost obsessive. It was on my mind all the time, trying to make this work so that I could just move on. That was always very present. And of course, I learned in evergreen conferences that obsessiveness is also connected with the same kinds of things that make, very prevalent among the same-sex attracted. And
That's what makes it gay.
yeah, we can go into that. But
well, next episode, yes.
Yeah.
I know that's perfect. That's a good place to leave it. But again, just underscoring why we've spent a whole episode talking about this in part 1 of this series is because it ties directly into the mission statement for the Out in Zion podcast that we intend to be very positive about the church and church experience, and at least analytical about it in a positive way, but also to not be prone to gay bashing or pathologizing, which is another way of saying approaching our experience of same-sex attraction or being gay as perpetually unwanted, that it's some sort of disease that we need to somehow repress, diminish, or just totally get rid of. Like, that is embedded in our mission statement for Out in Zion, and so that's been a worthy use of our hour today of this conversation, part 1. So again, be sure to tune in to our next episode, part 2 of this conversation, where we'll talk about the specifics of the underlying assumptions of what drives people in their efforts to try to change their sexual orientation. So tune in next time. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to this conversation. All the same, participants will be joining us in the next episode. So bye for now, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.